Oh, hi students! This is Tommy Wiseau here, writer, director, star, producer, and executive producer of movie The Room. Greatest movie ever. I hope you watch it before, watch it with your friends, it's a great movie. I'm here to talk about The Disaster Artist, which is a book about me and my best friend Greg. He's my best friend in the world. He never betrayed me, he good person. The book is bad quality, very Mickey Mouse. You can see here, you can see the title, The Disaster Artist. It's me. I am this. We have to talk inside, on phone, on internet, because coronavirus is no good. It's killing everybody, all bad people, but some good people too. I tell everybody they should stay inside, watch my movie again and again and again. It's always good for you. I always say to people, you can laugh, you can cry when you watch The Room, but just don't hurt yourself. Okay, I'm going to let your teacher, Mr. Bieri, who good guy, he's all around, all American guy, very good person. He say he good teacher, I don't know school, but he say he can help you with these chapters because some of it hard to understand, okay? So I let him talk. I'm going to leave now. I have to go put on some more belts, okay? Take care. Bye-bye. Wow, thanks, Tommy. That's so nice. Well, there you have it. Mr. Tommy Wiseau himself in my apartment. I don't know how he got in, and I hope he left. But if not, we have to soldier on. So I hope you guys, first of all, are doing well, taking care of yourselves, your family. And like I said, we're all trying to figure out what to do in this type of situation. But I thought it was important to still look at The Disaster Artist, the book that you guys have, and I hope you didn't leave it at school or else it'll be hard to find online. So let's start with chapter 11. I'll record everything, right? Which is what he says when he has his little magnaphone. So first of all, the first important thing to look at is on page 164. Now, on page 164, what we learn is that there's a lot of problems with production, which we already know, but they're at their first director of photography, who's called Raphael, and he's... My cat wants to go out more. What do you want? What do you want? You want to go out? Come on, go. Sorry about that. So the first thing we learn is that Raphael is almost ashamed of being on this movie because of how unprofessional it is. Of course it's unprofessional. Tommy's the one running it. Sorry, Tommy. But as we can see on page 164, Raphael's concern is that there's not an actual line producer. Now, what we know from the book is that Greg is supposed to be the line producer. And when I say supposed to, of course he doesn't actually know what a line producer is. What we find out a line producer is somebody who, takes care. It's almost like an assistant to the director. The director will say, listen, I need this, go get it. He'll go get it. It's a job that resembles something my dad used to like to say, which is a gopher. So, a gopher, if you're a gopher, it means go for this, go for that, go do that. You're like the man who's in charge of getting stuff. Now, or the woman. 2020. Let's be real here. But what's important to note here is that Raphael wants a line producer, so he, on page 64, it says here, obviously, I understood Raphael's concern, but I also knew what Tommy's response was going to be. Tommy had to feel that all decisions were coming from him. If someone else proposed something, no matter how strong the proposal, Tommy would refuse to take any actions. And unless Tommy believed he would directly benefit from an idea, no money would be spent, not under any circumstances. So what this basically means is, had this idea come from him, of course it would have been the best idea ever. Of course, right? Everything that comes from Tommy is genius. But the fact that someone is telling him what to do, again, we've seen this throughout multiple chapters, whether people are trying to make him save money, or trying to, hey, this set doesn't look real, let's film in my apartment, anything, Tommy always says no. It has to be his vision and his way of doing things. So he outright refuses. Also, near the bottom of the page, it says Tommy, because now they're going to go see him to confront him about this. And of course, Greg is following behind. He doesn't really want to. He knows that, Tommy's going to say no, but he's torn because on one hand, everybody's coming to him for, support, and they want him to, get through to Tommy, but he knows that Tommy is like an impenetrable force. You can't reason with him. So Tommy, as always, was off eating his lunch alone in Johnny and Lisa's living room set. So he's actually eating in the set where they filmed the room. He didn't like anyone but himself preparing his food plate, especially after the difficult first week of production. He occasionally voiced concerns that someone might spit in his food or drink. Tommy also refused to eat off plastic utensils, which he worried could be poisoned. In other words, he was already well on his way toward developing full-blown Wicked King paranoia. Raphael walked right up to him with me balefully dragging behind. So, another thing we learn right here is how distrustful and how paranoid basically Tommy is. Of course, at this point it makes sense because he knows that people probably hate him because of how he treats them. But, let's try to put ourselves in his shoes for a second. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you know that people around you in this room are not fans of you. Well, now, basically, all of his employees are, against his way of working, and they're really to the point that Tommy is scared about getting poisoned. Now, whether that's warranted or not, and whether he actually would be poisoned is another debate. But just the fact that he thinks so shows that there is not a good atmosphere in this working environment. On page 165, we have this confrontation between Raphael and Tommy, with Greg, of course, standing behind. Raphael says, listen, we need a line producer. And of course, Tommy is going to redirect it, or he's going to find a way to get out of it. So what does he say? He says, we have Greg, he said, as calmly as a magician might say, voila. Tommy, Raphael said, Greg is not a line producer. Greg is acting in your movie, and you can't keep putting this on him. Tommy set down his utensil and placed his hands on his thighs. His expression became one of great put-upon affront. Greg can do job. He has skills. Why are you putting Greg down? So see here, he's clearly attempting to turn this against Raphael, saying like, well, why don't you believe in Greg? When it's not a question of if Greg has the skills or not, is that Greg doesn't even know what a line producer is, and that's not his job. You imagine if he were to act in a movie, and then while he's acting, Tommy would yell at him, hey, we need, 4 Frappuccinos and some frames for the apartment. He would have to run out, and that, of course, would be problematic for the movie. So it almost is impossible to be an actor and a line producer, unless you're like, an extra. But someone like Mark, in this case Greg, who's playing a major character, could never be a line producer. So he said, listen, I'm not putting Greg down. I need a line producer. You get me one by Sunday, or I'm leaving. I'm not coming back to this movie, and I quit. Now, at this point, he's put an ultimatum on Tommy. He said, listen, this has to happen, or else I'm leaving. So, of course, what do you think happens come Sunday? No line producer, and he still just points at Greg and says, we have Greg. So Raphael just quits. Now, there's something in Hollywood to be known, is that in general, if you're a respected director of photography, your crew will follow you. If you quit a movie, or if you're unhappy with something, out of solidarity, they follow you off. Even if, maybe some of them are happy to keep working on this movie. Now, of course, that's what happens. Raphael says, I quit. I gave you an ultimatum. You're not taking it. I'm out of here. So as he's leaving, of course, Tommy is blowing up and going, "Well, very, very disrespectful. You will not sabotage my project. We do it my way." Right? So he's very upset at this point. Now, something really strange starts to happen here is that all of these people start asking for their money because, of course, they want to get paid before they leave to say, "Hey, listen, we want to get paid for the job we've already done, and then we're leaving." Now, of course, Tommy is so furious at this point. He says, "No, no, 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 no." So, on page 167, he immediately says, "Okay, I don't have to talk. No time. We have an emergency meeting now." So, on page 167, it says, "Knowing they had to suffer through Tommy's emergency meeting to get paid, everyone simultaneously groaned as they filed into Burns and Sawyer. The office we wound up in was not large, and the air was suffused with the hot stench of anger, body odor, and bad breath. Okay," he said, "so here we are. Let's have discussion. We have obviously problem today, but we're here to talk. It's America. I'm an American just like you." Why is he talking about being an American when this has nothing to do with the problematic? So, of course, at this claim, people are laughing, right? Or they're going like, why is he saying he's American? Because obviously, as he's saying it, he has a huge accent, which, goes to prove that he is an American. The absurdity of this comment was met with some giggling. "American with accent," Tommy said. "So be it. We like to know who stayed today because we will continue production, okay? We are not going anywhere. No one will ruin my movie." Except for him, one could argue. "Production will continue. Cameras will keep rolling." Now, very interesting. At the bottom of page 167, what we find out, as Greg says, in fact, the cameras were rolling at that moment, is that there's actually someone who's filming them behind the scenes. Tommy justifies this as saying that it's for a documentary on The Room. Because again, this movie in Tommy's head is like a masterpiece. So they need to make a documentary about, how it was conceived. Now, of course, the people on set are not happy. And it's even mentioned at the same page that Sandy, for example, at one point shoved the camera away and said, "Turn that off or I will. Stay the fuck away," whenever they saw him coming. So, of course, they're very upset with this. They don't want it because, they know the train wreck that this movie is going to be. So what we learn is the point of the filming is that basically Tommy is spying on his film crew. That explains why he was always 4 hours late, is that he would stay home and watch the footage of what people were saying about him, basically, which, again, shows the extent of his paranoia. Now, on page 168 now, about halfway through the first paragraph, it says, "All this time, Tommy had been spying on his own production." So just about every time someone made an unkind comment about Tommy, Marcus was there recording. Just about every time someone laughed about Tommy's acting, which was often, Marcus got it. So at this point, people are furious, but when they find this out, then all of a sudden they start thinking, ooh, this is bad. Because they know that they've been ridiculing him. And I mean, in any situation, when you've been caught talking behind somebody's back and they know, it's always an awkward situation. So at this point, Tommy's just going around the room and going, "You say I'm bad actor, well, you're bad film crew man, you think I'm, bad whatever," and he just starts, barraging all these people with comments that they've said. So of course, their level of intensity kind of drops in one shot. But also, it just goes to show you how crazy Tommy is in his interaction with other people, because at this point, he's just, to the point where you have to watch, like 4 hours every day of footage of just what people are saying about you. And of course, it's never good. So it's always just adding on to this idea that, oh, everybody's out to get you and everybody wants to ruin your project. Now, so he's gone. They find a second director of photography. His name is Graham. Now, Graham is the opposite of Raphael. Raphael had a lot of experience on making films. Graham comes in from film school, so he's fresh into the job. all excited. He's got that little, artistic point of view that he wants to put on everything, which is soon going to fade. Now, on page 171, once Tommy leaves, Greg and Sandy find Greg, have a little moment alone with him, and say, here's what you need to know. Greg's the line producer. He's also the lead actor. Graham began nodding and then suddenly stopped. He looked at us both. What? I've never been a line producer, I said. I don't even know what a line producer is, technically. Sandy continued. That crazy guy you just met, he's the star, director, writer, producer, and one of the executive producers. We don't know who else is producing this turkey because we haven't met them. He has a shitload of money but won't say what he does or where he's from. Graham looked at Sandy for a moment. What the heck is this thing about? It's not about anything. It makes absolutely no sense. Graham slowly said, okay. Sandy, you'll catch on to what's going on here really quickly. People don't believe the stories I tell about this experience. Oh, another thing, he bought all this equipment. So I like to think of Graham in this situation kind of like our point of view. He's like an outsider who comes to this situation, again, full of good ideas, good intentions, and just slowly begins to realize the craziness of Tommy Wiseau, right? At first he's like, oh, cool, I'm being hired to do a movie. And then everything that is added, right, he's starting to go, what is going on? He who has never done a movie before already knows that, you don't buy all this equipment. Even him, he says, it must have a huge budget, right? Nobody buys this much equipment. So that's basically his point of view. Now, at first, it's a lot more, laid back. He's brought all his friends to direct this movie. So there's a lot of young people. It has a different vibe to it. Now, the first scene that they shot with the second crew, with Graham, is the one where Claudette and Lisa are discussing how, she has slept with Mark. And she continues to say, you should marry Johnny. He's the perfect man. The actress who played Claudette, the lady who played Claudette, made the comment that she felt that her character was always just doing three things, saying, you should marry Johnny. Also, I hate this person and that person, and now I have to go home. Which isn't a lot of character development for an actor to play with. So what we find out is that in the original script of this scene, it starts with Lisa calling her mother on the phone, and by the end of the scene, she walks her out of the door. So during writing this scene, Tommy forgot that his character was actually on the phone. So it's very surreal. As Greg says, it's the most wonderfully surreal thing I've ever read. Now, throughout the book, Greg has mostly been seen as, a good character. He's a good person. He's always thinking, I gave Tommy a chance, and, I knew he needed a friend. And at this point in this chapter, he does admit to being a bad friend. On the bottom of page 174, he says here, we talked a bit about Tommy and how eccentric he was, and before too long I was saying, you haven't seen anything yet, follow me. I took them to Raphael's old giggle tent outside the studio, which had a VCR loaded with unused footage from the first 2 weeks of filming. I started showing them some of Tommy's greatest acting hits. Oh my God, one of them said, laughing, this is so terrible. Another one, looking back so as to not be overheard by anyone, said, seriously, Greg, does he think this is serious? This is real? Completely, I said. Tommy thinks this is the next Streetcar Named Desire. So Greg is admitting to being a bad friend, to ridiculing Tommy. So he's clearly, not set out to be, almost like an untouchable figure in this book. He does admit to having flaws. At this point, when they're outside, there's a commotion outside the tent, which, of course, commotion means that there is, a lot of blah, everybody starts going quack, quack, quack. And what they find out is that the actress playing Claudette actually had passed out because of the heat. It was so hot. And of course, Tommy's not bringing any air conditioners. He's not properly, giving enough water to his people. Now, if you look on page 175, it does say everyone obviously was very concerned. Tommy most of all. Now, you would think this is strange because he's shown little empathy for all his actors and the people working in this movie. So you would think that this is not something that he cares about. However, as it says here, liability was the word floating behind his eyes when he asked me to take Caroline to the emergency room. Now, liability, for those who don't know, basically means that he is responsible for his employees. So I don't know, I'm not familiar with the French equivalent, but basically it means that there can be repercussions legally if she were to press charges or to sue him, le poursuivre en justice, because he did not have air conditioning, he wasn't giving them water. So of course now all of a sudden Tommy's like super helpful. Oh no, you can take my car, go to the hospital, whatever you need. Now that it's too late. So last thing we're going to look at in this chapter, we're going to skip ahead to a lot of things here because this chapter is quite long. Graham also eventually comes to hit the same wall that Raphael had, and he'll give him an ultimatum. He'll say, I need a generator, right, for tomorrow. If I don't have it for tomorrow, I'm quitting. So again, in the span of maybe a month or two, we already have a second person giving Tommy an ultimatum and ultimately thinking to themselves, he's not going to do it, and it gives them an excuse to leave this project. So of course, come to the moment, Tommy doesn't have it. He said, I called the generator place and they didn't have any. Now, Graham actually had a plan. He knew that Tommy was not going to call. So he writes in, well, he doesn't write, sorry. He says, listen, I called them this morning. They said there was one. You're a liar. I quit. Now, oppositely to Raphael, who quit, very calmly and just said, listen, those are my conditions, and he left, Graham is making a scene. Now, he's saying, you never called, you're a liar, you're a fucking liar, and he's really getting upset. And so, of course, how does Tommy react to that, aggression and anger with his own aggression and anger, and then it's just escalating. So it's really, all of a sudden, an environment that should be fun to work in is actually turning into chaos. People are yelling everywhere. So at this point, he also quits the being director of photography, and again his crew leave with him. So for the second time in the same chapter, we have a director of photography who is leaving the movie with their crew. That means the cameraman, the lighting people, the people in charge of the script, everybody's leaving except for, of course, Greg and Sandy, who's still there, who again is piling on all these hours where he feels like he should be working with professionals. Last thing to note is right before the end of this chapter on page 187, so everybody's leaving the set. There's one guy who was working with Graham who says, hey, Tommy, I can be your director of photography. Tommy turned and looked at him. I'll run it. I'll light the set. I'll do the camera. Just pay me a couple $100 a day. Joe, my camera guy, will stay on with me too. Tommy hired Todd Barron on the spot. Now we see how good you are. So see, he's challenging him when in actuality, he's the only person who wants to stick around. Now, that means we're on our third director of photography, and luckily, spoiler, I guess, he's the one who's going to stay on for the rest. Because if you watch The Room, it does say director of photography, Todd Barron. So he's the new guy who's going to stick there, who's going to manage to put up with Tommy. But by now, he's seen how he is. Unlike Graham, who came in blind, he knows the kind of person he is. So that's it for chapter 11. The only thing we didn't look at that is quite interesting, I mean, if you've made it all the way here, we're like 20 minutes in now. If you've made it all the way here, you're probably interested in this chapter. So the last thing I wanted us to look at is the scene that he's not able to do in this book, in this one, and the one where Graham basically became crazy. It's not necessarily that important, but it is very funny. So that's why I put it at the end. I figured those who don't want to hear it can shut off. But on page 178, we hear that they're basically filming the scene where most of you probably remember this, when Tommy is in the stairs, kind of like hiding behind bars, right? And in the other corner of the room, there's Lisa and Claudette, who walk into the room just to say, hey, I've been unfaithful, I cheated on Tommy, and then she leaves. So, of course, filming this scene, again, he doesn't say much. All he has to say is, oh, I can't believe it. I will record everything. I'll show them. So, again, he can't remember his lines, and it says on the bottom, if you watch this scene carefully, you can see Tommy's eyes scan the impromptu cue card being held up before him. Now, I don't know how, maybe if you look on YouTube, you might find this scene. I'll show it to you when we get back to school eventually, but basically, if you look at that scene again, you can see that he's kind of like going, I'll show them, I'll record everything, because he's reading on the other edge. There's a guy holding a sign that says, what he's supposed to say, because people were not able to put up with him anymore. So I thought that was quite funny. And it is true, if you do watch that scene, you can totally see that Tommy's going and he's actually reading it. When again, it's 2 lines. He should be able to remember it. Unfortunately not. So, hopefully you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped clarify some things about chapter 11. I'll get back to you with chapter 12, and we'll keep going like that until the end. All right. If you have any questions, you can write them in the comments below. My God, I feel like a YouTuber. Write them in below, like and subscribe.